The inauguration of the President of Brazil is composed of several ceremonies that happen in the same day. Through democratic elections, coups, resignations and deaths, presidential inaugurations have been important events in Brazilian history. The ceremonies. The only essential part of the inauguration ceremonies, according to Brazil's federal constitution, is the taking of the constitutional oath of office before a joint session of the National Congress. However, other ceremonies, such as the parade leading up to the arrival of the president-elect in Congress, the transfer of the presidential sash from the former president to the new holder of the office, and a presidential reception at night also take place in the case of planned inaugurations. In the case of non-planned inauguration ceremonies, the non-essential festivities, including the investiture with the presidential sash, do not take place. In those cases, the inauguration of the new president consists only of the joint session of Congress, during which the new president takes the constitutional oath. The ceremonies described below are those observed for planned inaugurations since Brasilia became the federal capital. The inaugural parade, the president-elect and the vice-president-elect ride to Congress, where they are to take the oath of office in a ceremonial parade. The inauguration parade starts at the Cathedral of Brasilia, located at the beginning of Ministry's Esplanade. In front of the cathedral, the president-elect and vice-president-elect take the presidential Rolls-Royce and proceed in parade down the Ministry's Esplanade to the National Congress, while escorted by the Independence Dragoons. A number of presidents-elect have chosen to attend Mass at the Cathedral of Brasilia before the start of the inaugural ceremonies. In that case, a solemn Mass is scheduled to take place in the cathedral before the time set for the beginning of the state-sponsored inauguration ceremonies. The president-elect then hears Mass and leaves the cathedral at or around the time scheduled for the start of the inauguration parade. Other presidents-elect have chosen not to attend solemn Mass in the cathedral before the inauguration ceremonies. In that case, instead of proceeding to the parade from the cathedral, they simply arrive in front of the cathedral in the private cars, and at that point enter the presidential state car for the start of the parade. During the parade, the ceremonial state cars carrying the president-elect and the spouse, the vice-president-elect and the spouse are flanked by a formation of dragoons from the Presidential Guard of Honor. However, except in the case of a re-elected president and vice-president, the flagpoles in the ceremonial state cars remain empty during that part of the ceremonies, as those being transported are not yet president and vice-president. The parade ends at foot of the entrance ramp to the Palace of Congress, the taking of the oath of office before a joint session of Congress. Arriving at the National Congress, the President and Vice-President-elect are greeted by the President of the Senate and the President of the Chamber of Deputies. Inside the National Congress, a joint session of Congress takes place. The center seat of Congress Directing Board's table is taken by the President of Congress. The President-elect of the Republic is seated at the right-hand side of the President of Congress, and the Vice-President-elect of the Republic seats at the President of Congress's left-hand side. Also present at the table together with the members of Congress Directing Board are the President of the Chamber of Deputies, who sits to the right of the President-elect, and the President of the Supreme Federal Court, who sits to the left of the Vice-President-elect. Although the President of the Supreme Court is not a member of Congress, he is invited to the table to witness the act. Other members of Congress Directing Board take the remaining seats at the table, to the right of the President of the Chamber of Deputies, and to the left of the President of the Supreme Court. During the joint session, the President of Congress states the purpose of the meeting and acknowledges the receipt of the diplomas of election of the President-elect and of the Vice-President-elect, issued by the Superior Electoral Court. All those present are then asked to stand, and the President-elect and the Vice-President-elect are successively invited to take the constitutional oath. The President-elect and Vice President-elect take their oaths of office, and each oath is followed by applause. At the time, immediately upon taking the oaths, they become President and Vice President of the Republic. As soon as the constitutional oaths are taken before the assembled Congress by both the President and the Vice President, the new office holders are declared by the President of Congress to be invested in the Presidency and the Vice Presidency of the Republic. Normally, the national anthem is played at this point by a band of the Brazilian Navy Marine Corps. As soon as the oaths are taken and the declarative announcement by the President of Congress is made, and in military language the anthem is said to be played in salute to the President of the Republic. In some inaugural ceremonies, however, such as Dilma Rousseff's second inauguration in 2015, the national anthem was not played at this point of the proceedings, being instead played at the beginning of the congressional ceremony. Once the national anthem ends, one of the secretaries of Congress reads out the instrument recording the oaths taken and the investiture of the President and Vice President in their offices. If the national anthem is played at the beginning of the joint session, then, immediately after the oaths of office and a declarative announcement by the President of Congress, the instrument recording the investiture is read out. That instrument, a précis verbal of the constitutionally essential part of the inauguration ceremonies, is written in a special investiture book recording the investiture of all presidents and vice presidents. Once the reading of this document finishes, the new president and the new vice president then sign the instrument recording their investiture, and the document is also signed by the President of Congress, the President of the Chamber of Deputies and other members of Congress Directing Board. The document is also signed by the President of the Supreme Federal Court. Once the deed is signed by all who are to sign it, the President of Congress then invites the President of the Republic to address the joint session. The President's inaugural address is given at this point, and the inaugural address is followed by a short speech by the President of Congress, who then finishes thanking the foreign heads of state, heads of government, ministers of foreign relations and other special envoys for the presence, and also acknowledges and thanks for the presence the members of the diplomatic corps, the governors of states, the governor of the federal district, judicial, civil and military authorities, as well as religious representatives. And after those thanks, the President of Congress closes the proceedings of the joint session. The inaugural address of the President of the Republic and the concluding speech by the President of Congress are only delivered in the case of planned inaugurations. In the case of a non-planned inauguration, the President of Congress closes the joint session as soon as the instrument recording the investiture of the President and the oath taken has been read out and signed. Once the joint session of Congress is closed, the congressional leaders then escort the new President and the new Vice President from the chamber and accompany them to the front ramp of the Palace of Congress. The military ceremony. Once the President emerges from the National Congress, he pauses at the top of the front ramp of that palace and, upon sight of the new head of state, a 21-gun salute is immediately fired by the KN battery. During the firing of the salute, the national anthem is again played. A brief military ceremony then takes place outdoors. As the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, he is received at the doors of the National Congress by the Presidential Guard Battalion of the Army, and by Navy and Air Force troops presenting arms. The President then reviews the troops and salutes their colors. After that, the President and the Vice President take the ceremonial state cars to the Planalto Palace, the seat of the Presidency of the Republic, while, except in the case of a re-elected president, on the parade leading up to Congress the car flagpoles were empty. The car flagpoles now display the national flag and the presidential standard, the vice presidential standard. The ceremony at the Planalto Palace. Arriving at the Planalto Palace, the new president and vice president pause at the foot of the palace's entrance ramp, while a military band of the Presidential Guard plays the presidential salute. Once the salute is given, the new president and vice president ascend the entrance ramp, and are greeted at its top by the former president and by the former vice president. Troops of the 1st Guards Cavalry Regiment, forming a guard of honor, aligned at both sides of the entrance ramp during the entire ceremony. This is the first time the new president and his predecessor meet during the inaugural ceremonies, since the former president and vice president take no part in the preceding stages of the inaugural solemnities. The new president and the former president, followed by the new and former vice presidents, then go side by side to the spot where the ceremony of the transfer of the presidential sash is to take place. The former president uses the sash up to the moment when he places it on the shoulder of the new president. The presidential sash is the insignia that symbolizes the office of the president. In Brazil, the sash was created in December 1910, when it was instituted as a symbol of the presidency by a statute signed into law by President Hermes da Fonseca, Brazil's 8th president. Thus, in Brazil, unlike other republics, the creation of the sash was not simultaneous with the establishment of the office of president. Also, while in other Latin American countries the transfer of the presidential sash takes place before Congress, in Brazil it is not the case. While in other South American countries the reception of the sash by the new president forms part of the essential solemnities of the inauguration, and takes place immediately at the moment of the assumption of office. In Brazil, the transfer of the sash, while still highly symbolic of the installation of the new president, is not an essential part of the presidential investiture, and therefore it only takes place in the case of planned inaugurations. Nevertheless, the handover of the sash from the former president to the new office holder is considered an important symbol of the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the next, in accordance with the will of the people and the constitutional order. Indoors, or more commonly, in the outdoor parlatorium of the Planalto Palace, the former president hands over the presidential sash to the new president. The national anthem is played for the third time as soon as the sash is placed over the shoulder of the new president. In the case of a re-elected president, there is, of course, no ceremony for the handing over of the presidential sash. Instead, the reinvested president merely reassumes the use of the sash, and that is not done in the parlatorium, but before the president's arrival there. 3 Brazilian presidents have been re-elected: Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff. In Cardoso's case, as soon as he re-entered the Planalto Palace after the joint session in the Palace of Congress, he went indoors and received the presidential sash on a cushion. His chief of staff placed it on the president's shoulder. The president then went on to present himself at the parlatorium. In the case of President Lula's re-election, the president received the sash at the foot of the entrance ramp of the Planalto Palace, and thus entered the palace via the ramp already wearing the sash, going directly to the parlatorium. In the case of President Dilma Rousseff, she received the presidential sash from an aide at the top of Planalto Palace's entrance ramp, immediately after ascending that ramp, while re-elected Presidents Cardoso and Lula had the sash placed on the shoulders by the aide who brought it to them. President Dilma Rousseff took the sash and she placed it on her shoulder herself. President Rousseff then remained at the top of the palace's front ramp, facing the square, as the national anthem was played, and once the national anthem finished she then proceeded to the parlatorium. The prior re-elected presidents merely resumed the use of the sash without the ceremony of the national anthem being played at this point. In the outdoor parlatorium, the president, already using the presidential sash, delivers a public address facing the Three Powers Square where the people are assembled. In the case of a new president, the speech begins as soon as he has received the sash from the former president and the national anthem has been played, and the former president listens to the speech at the side of the new president. The president then escorts the former president to the main entrance, and the former president and vice president walk down the palace's front ramp. Reaching the foot of the ramp, the former president and vice president take official cars that transport them home to the airport. By entering the car at the foot of the palace's ramp and being transported away, the former president takes his leave of the official ceremonies of his successor's inauguration. The parts of the ceremony involving the front ramp of the Planalto Palace are also considered highly symbolic. When the new president and vice president walk up the ramp to enter the palace, this is considered to represent the ascent of the new chief executive to power and to the exalted position of the presidency, whereas the moment when the former president and the former vice president walk down the ramp towards the people who are assembled below is regarded as representative of the fact that they have surrendered power to the new administration, and now become once again ordinary citizens of the Republic. In reality, however, there is no actual transfer of power taking place at the above-mentioned symbolic moments. The term of office of the predecessor had ended since midnight, and at that moment the 4-year term of office of the successor began. His 4-year term having started, the successor entered into office immediately upon taking the oath, while the predecessor, divested of the power of the presidency since midnight, was allowed to continue to use the presidential sash until the moment in the ceremonies when the sash is transferred, and reside in Planalto Palace until the moment in the ceremonies when the solemnly descends the front ramp, only as a matter of ceremony and protocol. The ceremonies only emphasize, with the symbolic ritual, the reality of the change of government. If the former president desires to leave the city of Brasilia immediately after leaving the palace, he is usually allowed the courtesy of a last trip in the presidential airplane that takes the former president to his hometown or to another Brazilian city of his choice. During the flight, however, the airplane does not bear the call sign Brazilian Air Force One, as the passenger is no longer the President of the Republic. Usually, when the plane carrying the former president arrives at its destination, the former president is received at the airport by a gathering of his political supporters. First duties. The first duty of the new president is to appoint the Minister of Justice and the rest of the cabinet. Thus, when the former president has left Planalto Palace, the new president goes indoors and enters a hall of the Planalto Palace where his future cabinet and several guests are already waiting. There the investiture of the president's cabinet takes place. The president first signs a decree appointing the Minister of Justice. The appointed minister then comes forward to sign the investiture book. After the Minister of Justice signs the investiture book, the president proceeds to appoint the remainder of the cabinet members, signing decrees that are countersigned by the Minister of Justice. When each decree is signed, the appointed minister comes forward and signs the investiture book. Once the entire cabinet has been invested, the general officers chosen as professional commanders of each branch of the armed forces are appointed and invested by the president, who is ex officio the supreme commander of the armed forces. Then follows the appointment and investiture of other senior officers of the executive branch, such as cabinet-level officials of the presidency of the Republic. Once all the cabinet and cabinet-level officers have been invested, the act of their investiture usually ends with a family photo of the new administration around the new president and vice president. For this photo, the new minister's alignment and proximity to the president is dictated by the order of precedence, with the ministers who head older departments standing in the first row. row, and the heads of the newer departments standing in the back rows. Some departments, such as the Department of Defense, take precedence from prior departments now abolished. When all the cabinet, the professional commanders of each branch of the armed forces and other senior executive officials have been appointed and invested, the president then goes to another hall of the palace. A queue is formed and the new president greets one by one the heads of state and heads of government present, as well as the heads of mission and other foreign envoys. Once all official foreign representatives have had the opportunity to greet the new president, he then goes on to greet other Brazilian authorities, such as Supreme Court justices, congressional leaders and state governors, as well as representatives of the civil society, such as Brazilian cardinals, rabbis, etc. For the inauguration of President Dilma Rousseff, the usual order of the presidential first duties was slightly reversed. First, the new president greeted the foreign heads of state, heads of government and official envoys, and only then she proceeded to the ceremony of the investiture of the cabinet and cabinet-level offices. After that ceremony of investiture and the taking of the family photo of the administration, the president went on to receive the Brazilian authorities and the representatives of civil society. This change in protocol, with the meeting of the foreign representatives preceding the investiture of the cabinet and cabinet-level offices, was adopted so that the foreign representatives would not be left waiting for too long before having an opportunity to shake hands and exchange a few words with the president. However, the ceremonial downside of the new arrangement was that, during the meeting with the queue of foreign representatives, the President of the Republic had at her side the soon-to-be Minister of Foreign Relations, but the minister-in-waiting was not yet formally appointed and invested in his office. It is unknown whether this new arrangement of the first duties will prevail in future inaugurations. Reception. At the night of the inauguration, the President holds a formal reception at the Alvorada Palace, the presidential residence, or at Brasília's Itamaraty Palace, the seat of the Ministry of Foreign Relations. This reception is often a ball with dinner, and traditionally the presidential ball was a white tie event. However, Presidents Lula da Silva and Rousseff have opted for less formal and less lavish parties, and have instead hosted more simple cocktails, to which guests were expected to attend in suit and tie. Format of presidential inaugurations. When Rio de Janeiro was the capital of Brazil. Rio de Janeiro was the Brazilian capital until the construction of Brasília in 1960. The ceremonies were different but had a similar format. They started at Tiradentes Palace, where the president took the oath of office before a joint session of Congress and delivered an inaugural address. He then proceeded in parade to the Cartete Palace in the ceremonial state car, after receiving the presidential sash indoors, in the presence of dignitaries and guests assembled in one of the halls of Cartete Palace. The president appeared on the balcony and addressed the crowds. Some presidents, instead of appearing in the balcony to deliver the speech facing the people, chose to deliver the address in the same hall of the Cartete Palace where the ceremonial transfer of the presidential sash took place. The new president then escorted the former president as he left the presidential palace. The appointments, greetings and reception were held at the Cartete Palace.